Strong looks different for each of us, and it's time to put focus on our unique journeys that get us there. This space created weekly is for athletes to improve their mindset in order to better navigate challenges that come up in sport and in different seasons of life. On this show, we ask the questions that lead to better answers and have the conversations that truly matter. This is the Becoming Your Strong podcast. Hey, you guys, welcome back to another episode of the Becoming Your Strong podcast. You guys, this is a really cool episode today because I not only get to have an amazing conversation with someone who's going to drop some serious gold, but I also get a chance to build a deeper connection with someone that I just found out is in my backyard in Fort Collins as we were just getting on the platform here, getting ready to record. Today on the podcast, we are going to have a guest interview with someone who does a lot of online presence, and I'm assuming some sort of in-person presence as well too, but specifically working with women in nutrition for athletes. So Kristen, welcome to the podcast. We are super excited to have you.
Yes, thanks so much, Kayla. Yeah, I'm really stoked to be here. And it was also fun to learn that you're just over in Loveland, which is like a half hour away from me. Super close.
It's crazy. It's so crazy. But yes, we were just bonding over the fact that the weather was just really silly, but how we need it because we need moisture right now. But anywho, so Kristen, this is something where you reached out to me and you were like, hey, I love the tone of this podcast. I love what you're doing, not only just for listeners in general, but women in general as it relates to, them in athletics. I have a background in this stuff, would love to have the opportunity to share some of my passions and my insights as it relates to working with them. So I'm just going to hand the microphone over to you and allow for you just to explain like, hey, here's my background. Here's where I came from. This is why I'm so passionate about this area. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So starting from the beginning, I didn't actually grow up an athlete. Like I didn't play sports in high school. I was a band geek. I was in marching band. And so I found sports and athletics and training when I was 21, so early 20s. But at that time, I was in school to become a nutrition or a dietitian. And at the beginning, I was actually more focused on public health. And I wanted to work with women's health and community nutrition, helping to provide nutrition education to communities that needed it, work in clinics like a WIC clinic. But at the end of undergrad, I picked up cycling from a family that I babysat for. And they were like, hey, I think you would really like this. And they do all kinds of sports. They're a very active family, like climbers, cycling, all these things. But I quickly loved it and met a really great community of people and very quickly got into like the racing scene in Columbus, Ohio, where I'm from. I went to Ohio State University. And so my passion for athletics and being active like really picked up very quickly when I was in my early 20s. But it was all super new to me. And through that experience, I ended up getting my RD and then went back to school to get my master's in nutrition. And my master's was focused on dietary interventions for improving inflammation in postmenopausal women.
Wow.
So I had that like women's health background and focusing on that. And at the same time, I was training for racing and ended up getting my first pro contract signed out of my master's degree.
Amazing.
Yeah. And it was, professional in cycling is somewhat scaled, right? It's more like I was getting a small stipend and money to go race around the country. But it gave me time to build my private practice. I was also coaching cycling at that time. And I worked with a really wide range of people, but my specialization is in women's nutrition and understanding how female hormones and the life cycle of female athletes, how nutrition influences their needs across the lifespan. Absolutely. So anyone from somebody with female reproductive organs to someone that identifies as a woman, like understanding culturally and then also physiologically what their needs are and how that plays into just their experience of nutrition, but also what's going to help them to be successful.
Amazing. Yeah, see, and I'm thinking about all the listeners that tune into the show weekly, and how much gold, like I said, they're going to get just out of this conversation alone, because this is exactly where we're at. And I mentioned this to you as well before we pressed record, is like I've been in some interesting waves of life where I went from losing a bunch of weight to now I'm fueling for performance. And I've went from even like shorter, like 15-minute, completely anaerobic races to now I'm running half marathons, right? And all of those they're different. And you got to understand what levers to pull when you're doing certain efforts and when you're engaging in certain things. And so I think where it'd be such a great place to start is just to go back to like the very foundational, fundamental level and understanding the keys to just fueling properly for training, for racing. Again, understanding that a lot of my listeners, they come from the Deca High Rock space. So anywhere from 10-minute races to hour-long races, as well as the longer endurance, which you're more familiar with. So I'll let you run with that and just kind of giving us your top tips as it relates to that.
Yeah, I love that you use the words fundamental and foundation. I use those words all the time.
Yep.
And foundation is actually the word that I chose for myself. Like I choose a word of the year every year. And my word this year is foundation. Like for
That's
myself,
beautiful.
just building a good foundation in life and in my career and in my body. And so I really love that you said that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it does all start with a good foundation. Like it is, even when I'm working with somebody in private practice, and they are coming to me, maybe they're training for a high rocks event, which I work with a lot of high rocks athletes. It's like a
Makes sense.
primary demographic. Yep. I think it's so fun. I love the format. I haven't done it myself, but yeah, it's just a really fun format training wise, a lot of double days, and you get to do so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
So that being said, the foundation is really kind of boring, but so important. Like we need to make sure that we have balanced meals throughout the day with fruits and vegetables, starchy vegetables and grains, protein, and getting those time points met: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You might be surprised, but a lot of the people that I work with are skipping breakfast, or they're having like
Yeah.
a salad for lunch with protein, or they're having, their light dinners. So the foundation is really making sure that we're eating balanced meals throughout the day and we have those food groups met.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes total sense. I mean, when you look at how you're building your stuff for the day, and this is something maybe you can jump into, it's understanding what those needs are, especially around your training or around your racing, even in the days leading up to it. And that's something that took me a while to understand. Is what is my body actually needing more of versus what is it needing less of? So maybe you could even dial in on that too, just again, from the fundamental level, as far as like, let's say that, you have a training day and you're training for high rocks, since you just brought up that you've been working with a lot of high rocks based athletes, is if they're training in the morning or if they're training in the middle of the day, like how are their needs going to look different from a day-to-day perspective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I like to describe somebody that's not exercising with intention or trying to focus on their fueling. Like ultimately, they can eat whatever composition of foods for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? And it's kind of like whatever they have access to. But with athletes, we need to also focus on what is going to optimize and support our training or our competition. So, what that looks like is we want a lot of our carb rich foods concentrated around whenever we're training. And we also want to consider what's going to impact our GI issue at that time, right? Like, I'm not going to tell somebody to eat a bunch of beans and cruciferous vegetables and nuts and seeds like an hour before they go do a hard workout, or they're probably going to throw up and feel awful.
Yep.
So, getting some of those simple, more easy to digest carb rich foods like fruit or anything from bagels to pasta to oats to rice before exercise. And then after exercise, we can have more complex carb rich foods. So, like I said, the beans, lentils, sweet potatoes, quinoa, things like that. And this will support both our overall nutrient density for the day, but also support our training.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I hear from the athletes that I coach more often than not is I can't eat before competition or I can't eat before a workout, especially if they're early in the morning, like my 5, 6 a.m.ers. So what are some of the ways that you've helped them get around that specifically?
Yep. Yeah. So a lot of people I work with exercise at 5 a.m., 6 a.m. I have like a running coaching group that I work with in Northern California, and some of their group runs literally start at 4:30 a.m. in the morning.
That's yuck.
Like
I'm
these
not
people
doing
are
that.
getting up at like 3 a.m.
Better be going to
So
bed at like 6. Goodness.
oh, for sure. Yeah. So that's obviously exceptional. But
Yeah.
for people that are exercising first thing in the morning, they may only have 45 minutes between waking up and getting their workout in. Is if you don't feel like you can tolerate food during, then even having something like a carb rich drink mix, or before, you don't, even having something like a carb rich drink mix during can be really helpful to provide that fuel to the system. And ultimately, when we have something, really anything to eat before or during, that helps to reduce the muscle protein breakdown that happens when we exercise fasted. And that's also more specific to female athletes. Like there's quite a bit of research in people with female reproductive organs, understanding that we do have a lot more muscle protein breakdown. We use amino acids as a fuel source for our muscles if and when we're
Wow.
exercising fasted.
Wow. I was gonna say, is there anything more to jump in that on? Cause like here I am, I'm like geeky. I want to learn more about that specifically. But I think that, one person in the field, and not necessarily for women in nutrition, but just in nutrition in general, as I follow a lot of Nick Bare and his whole, once you train fueled, you'll never train fasted type situation. But I don't think people truly understand what's going on at like more of like that again, the fundamental or foundational level. So do you mind explaining what's actually happening for it to maybe resonate more with people?
Yeah. So let's take it faster versus, well, let's take fed versus fasted. So when we are exercising in a fed state, and actually, even when I took like biochemistry and macronutrients in my master's, it was two distinctions between the fed state and the fasted state. And metabolically, there are two very different things going on, different cascade of hormones, all these things that our bodies are doing.
Mhm.
So when we exercise in a fed state, we have that substrate or that fuel source for our body to execute the exercise and able to put out more power, have better mental acuity, have more of that blood glucose available to our muscles, and also increasing things like plasma volume, assuming we are well hydrated. So all of these things help to get more nutrients, more energy, more food and fluid to our muscles to do the workout. And quite a bit of research shows even if you don't feel necessarily different or better during the workouts, because I work with a lot of people, they're like, yeah, I don't really feel any better during the
Right.
workout. They absolutely see better recovery, like 100% of the time. They have more energy throughout the day. And also, they are able to get back to the next workout feeling more recovered and like they can put out more watts or lift heavier or do more reps. And ultimately, that's going to lead to better metabolic health and performance as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You also mentioned hydration, and they're assuming that you're hydrated. I think hydration is another very large piece of the puzzle that people maybe skip out on or don't think about as much as, actually consuming something. So do you want to talk about like maybe some of the hydration needs? Again, understanding that there's going to be different events that require different things, but what role does like hydration play and how can we be better at that?
Mm-hmm. I mean, so it starts with effectively every metabolic process in the body requires hydrogen and oxygen.
Mhm.
So if you can picture exercise or being able to exert yourself in any way, that's going to be the first thing to go. The body is going to prioritize organ function, um, making sure it keeps its core body temperature down, and all of these things. So it's fundamental to both performance and overall health. There's also
Mhm.
quite a bit of data showing that hydration status is actually a really important marker for longevity and how your body is functioning over time.
Mhm. Wow. Yeah, that's a big deal. What about like I think supplements are taking over the world right now. And you have things like elements. We talk a lot about salt, or just different types of electrolytes. Is there anything that you recommend versus don't recommend? And feel free to like maybe call out based off of your research or personal experience of supplements that you recommend a lot for your athletes. But I know for hydration, for me personally, like I drink Element or I'll drink like a carb based drink that has electrolytes in them. Again, based off of what kind of training I'm doing, mostly the aerobic endurance based stuff. But I'd be curious to know your thought process on some of those because there's some hot takes out there on this one.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think I mean, so one thing that's honestly been eye-opening for me, I've been doing a lot more sweat electrolyte testing with my athletes that I work with.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're going to some kind of facility or they're ordering a test kit online and they're measuring their sodium, the amount of sodium in 1 liter of their sweat, right? And it's fascinating how much variety there is for athletes. Like some athletes are losing 300 milligrams of sodium per hour, which is not very much.
Mm-mm.
Other athletes I'm working with are losing like over 2,000 milligrams of sodium per hour. Yeah. So, and there's other considerations to make as well. I would say like the couple top tips I'd give in this supplement electrolyte conversation would one be know that things like Element or Liquid IV or Noon tablets, like these are really helpful for outside of exercise. And that helps to bring more water into the cell. So when we have sodium with our fluids, more of the water will actually be absorbed rather than getting peed out. So if you're just drinking water all day, yes, you'll be hydrated, but you might pee out more of the fluid that you're intaking compared to if you have sodium or one of these products in your water. So that's really important. And then really anything that you're using as a fuel source during exercise, I definitely recommend to have carbs in it. So Scratch Labs is a common one for endurance athletes. Momentous came out with a Momentous Fuel that's 30 grams of carb per serving, which is really good. Honestly, even Gatorade, if like if all you have access to is Gatorade, it's really not a bad option for during exercise.
For sure. For sure. And this is again more of like something that I'm selfishly interested in. When it comes to things like Element, is that something that, I mean, based off of like what our body is doing internally, is that something we should be drinking like intra session, or is that something like you said outside of the session? And if so, when is it best placed?
This is a really good question I'm glad that you brought this up because I do this education a lot on specifically this product. So Element is a hyperosmolaric formula, meaning that there's so much sodium in it that the body actually has to take water from the rest of your body into your gut to have an equal balance to then pull it out. So it will actually delay your hydration more than if you had plain water. Ultimately, you'll be absorbing more of the fluid, but it's literally just sitting in your gut. Like it's sitting in your gut, waiting for the exercise to get done, and then you'll absorb it. But for during exercise, it would be better to have like a quarter of a packet of LMNT in like a liter of fluid than it would to have a full packet in a liter.
Wow. See, that's good for me to know because there's definitely been times where I've just like, I'll have like sip on Element throughout my session. And maybe that's more like lifting based. Sometimes, again, I'll do it if it's like a shorter aerobic session. But it sounds like then a better sort of intra-fueling would be something with carbs and those additional electrolytes. And like I drink G1M Sport from Bare Performance Nutrition. That's like my personal favorite. But it sounds like that's better. And then leaving the Element for something like even like post-recovery.
Totally. Yep. And diluting it to a certain extent. Again, you'll delay the amount of it'll take more time for your body to actually get the hydration when it's really concentrated like that.
Okay. Sweet. Well, I learned something new today, folks. Hopefully you did too. Drink your Element at the right time. Perfect. Well, let's talk about now, like I said, I have listeners that fall in the hybrid training camp, and then I have listeners that fall in the endurance camp. I have to imagine, again, based off the fact that I've been in both of these camps, that there's differences or key fundamentals between the two of them, again, and how it comes to fueling. So curious to know what, again, your top tips or things for people to know as it relates to, again, both of those areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and again, it's going to vary so much person to person and what their training is. But in general, and maybe you can help fill in some gaps here, Kayla. But like high rocks athletes or hybrid athletes, they might be doing like 7 to 10 hours of training a week, or like 5 to 7.
I would, yeah, again, it depends on the level. Like your elite level athletes are doing 10 plus hours a week. I would say most people that listen to this are anywhere from 5 to 8. Maybe there's some that are pushing 10, but I would say that's more or less where they're at.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think a lot of athletes that are doing like training for a half marathon, for example, or training for a marathon, a lot of people I work with, they'll do a handful of hour-long training sessions during the week, and then maybe they'll have 1 or 2 long runs on the weekend. Yep. Right. So the long runs are really any training session that's over an hour and a half, or really pushing that 1.5 hour limit. That's where fueling during the training session is very, very important. We might benefit from fueling during shorter sessions if we're under fueled going in, like those morning sessions. But the research shows we need fuel for hour and a half or longer training sessions.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. And that goes for racing as well. So
for sure.
That's one of the major differences, is the fueling needs in competition or in training. But ultimately, then it also comes down to like the intensity and the type of training sessions you're doing. So for runners, I mean, a lot of runners I work with, they're burning between 500 and 700 calories an hour. And a really good rule of thumb, which one of my clients recently turned me on to this, and I didn't ever think about it that way, but it totally makes sense, is you burn about 100 calories a mile for running. And that's helpful because if you're only running 4 miles an hour, like you're doing 15-minute miles, you might burn 400 calories. But if you're running 7 miles an hour and you're doing something like, I think that would be like 8-minute miles, you're going to be burning more calories, right? You're going at a higher intensity, running faster. So that would be like 700 calories. So the overall energy needs of the day generally are quite a bit higher with aerobic exercise compared to something like hypertrophy or anaerobic based exercise that's not like a HIIT training session.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's the interesting thing too that we could probably chat about, is especially when you look at the hybrid racing, there's the element of endurance and then there's the element of strength. And so if you look at like my training plan at the current moment, I will hit 2 to 3 muscular endurance lifts throughout the week. And then the rest of my week is all aerobic based. So these are anywhere from 90-minute to 2-hour long sessions. Maybe they're of the longer zone too. Well, typically, if they're of that length, they're definitely within that easier feel. But then I also have my more anaerobic, they're shorter HIIT type of workouts. So you have the school of thought of like, well, I should be fueling more or at my like normal range during the aerobic days. And then you have the people that are doing the strength days are like, oh, I should pull back on calories a little bit because I'm not training as hard or burning as many calories. I'd love to hear more about like your perspective on that and maybe how that's kind of a myth and how maybe fueling different on one day might impact your training performance the rest of the week.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So to a certain extent, you can modulate like the amount of energy you're eating day to day. Like maybe you did a really long, hard run and you're in a couple 100-calorie deficit. The next day, if you eat a couple extra 100 calories and you're more energy positive, like this will help to meet your overall energy needs for the week. And just to say it, I would say about 90% of the athletes I work with, especially runners and people that are newer to training, I would say 90% are under fueled, by the calories they're eating at the end of the day. Like the food records I get, it shows up in their blood work. because a lot of the time it's really not intuitive. It's not intuitive for a lot of people to eat 2,500 calories, 2,800 calories, 3,500 calories.
Mm-hmm.
So they think like, I'm not hungry, like I feel good, but it does show up as you do that over time. So just to say it, like, it is a really helpful exercise to do a few days of food tracking and just to see where you're at in terms of meeting your body's energy needs. But ultimately, I think your question about like how to fuel for the more strength training days versus the aerobic days. So, one thing that's really interesting, and there isn't really a good solution for us in the field of nutrition, but we know that strength training or HIIT training, these types of sessions, you don't burn as many calories during the workout, but it does increase your body's metabolic rate for the rest of the day. Compared to aerobic based exercise, you're going to burn whatever 400, 600, 700 calories an hour, but this doesn't necessarily impact your body's metabolic rate for the rest of the day as it does strength training. So we don't have any kind of like formula additive that we use in case you're doing a lot of strength training, and that's where that personalization comes in. But really the best way to do it, honestly, is to track your food just for a few days. I don't recommend tracking every day. I don't think really anybody needs to do that. But just getting a ballpark idea of where your intuition of what you are doing intuitively is matching up with what the calculated needs are.
Yeah. I think eating intuitively is a whole nother topic that we could probably spend some time on. Especially for someone like me, I've been very vulnerable about my journey of like body dysmorphia, having toxic relationships with food because of, when you lose weight and then you start to gain some weight back because of how your body is shifting through different like goals and seasons of life that you have. I know for me, it's like, oh, well, I've already ate within like my calorie range for today, but I'm still feeling incredibly hungry. And I'm sure there's a lot of different things that are playing into that, whether it's the stories that I'm telling myself around my food, even what phase of my cycle that I'm in, right? Like how that might dictate my energy needs. But I'm not sure if there's anything that you could say, especially because we're talking to women that have so many complexities around just like hunger cues and like when to listen to them maybe versus like when to question and then like be like, am I really hungry or am I needing food? I don't know if that's something you talk about a lot with your athletes.
Constantly, all the time.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'm not the only one.
Yeah. So, but I think it's an important distinction to make that for athletes specifically, there will be times when we need fuel or our bodies need some kind of nutrients that intuitively we're not really wanting to have, or we're not having those hunger cues come on. So really common times would be after exercise and also during exercise. So when we're exercising, our heart rates are higher. We're diverting blood flow out of the gut into the rest of the body to do the exercise. The blood flow is going to our muscles, to our cardiac system. So in that way, like it's literally shutting down digestion. You're not getting those cues on purpose because the body is in this state of like trying to do this activity. So in that way, it is really important to understand that although you don't have those cues, having that recovery shake and the protein and carb rich snack after training is super important. And that goes the same for fueling during exercise. Like I think a lot of people, they go until they get tired, but when they are fueling early and consistently, they can go longer without feeling tired.
Yeah. Yeah, that's big. What about on the other side of the coin when it's like, again, like for me, for example, I did my muscular endurance lift. I did like a HIIT EMOM after. I've already like hit my certain points of the day where I've had breakfast, I've had my snack, I've had lunch, getting ready to have my snack, but maybe I'm feeling like extra hungry or something of some sort. Is there anything that like you've given your athletes guidance around as far as like when to follow the hunger cue versus like maybe just even questions to ask to determine, are you really hungry or are you just like fantasizing about food?
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. So first off, I would say, if you're craving like a specific food, that could be more of like an emotional response,
Mm,
or it could be that your brain is just craving glucose. Like a lot of my women athletes I work with, like they crave like certain sweets or something like that. And 9 times out of 10, it's because they are under fueled going into that time, and
mm,
their bodies just weren't telling them they had those hunger cues, but like they're in a significant calorie deficit by the time they got there. And so when we work together and try to incorporate more carb rich foods like in breakfast and in lunch, they get way less of those cravings. So that's typically the root cause. But let's say in your situation, Kayla, like you're hitting all those time points, right? Like
mhm.
clearly you had the lunch, you had the snacks. Um, One question to ask yourself, like I said, is are you craving like cupcakes? Or if you had like Greek yogurt with some berries, would that also feel nourishing and satisfying? And typically, I'll recommend some kind of snack that has both carbohydrates and protein and fat, because we want it to be enough calories that you actually feel satiated and nourished, but also you have a range of those nutrients, which will help to meet your daily needs overall and also have that satiety.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great question to ask. Like I was thinking, I was like, huh, when I get I need food. I
Yeah.
think at night specifically, it's man, some chocolate sounds awesome. And I'm wondering how much of that is because I've trained myself to have like that fun little dessert at night versus is it what I actually need? So that's something that I'm personally still working through.
Yeah.
So that's
And
yeah.
and just to say it too, I mean, honestly, there is like no problem with having a small square of chocolate. Like that is
Mhm.
not something bad you're doing. That is not some kind of indulgence you're having. Like a small piece of chocolate is quite negligible in terms of your calorie needs for the day. And it also provides antioxidants and other nutrients that are in chocolate. So it's when we have like a whole chocolate bar and
Yeah.
we don't like our tummies hurt afterwards, that's when it becomes an issue.
Yeah. Well, and I think that also brings up a question that I've had. Um, Thinking about fueling towards the end of the day, because you think about what sleep does, that's when we're recovering the most. And I'm sure there's people that talk about fasting and what windows during the day you should be eating your food within. Not necessarily curious in that. However, I am curious to know, like, have you had athletes that you do find are getting most of their calories in at the end of the day, and how may that be impacting them, and like maybe they're training the next day or how they wake up feeling the next day? I'm not sure how much of that you run into, but I get nervous that sometimes that with my schedule that I am putting a lot of calories at the end of the day and maybe my digestion is getting impacted because of that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I get more of that with my male clients. Like a lot of the men I work with, they
Makes
skip
sense.
breakfast and then they have like a protein bar in the afternoon. And then all of a sudden their dinner has to be like 3,000 calories.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So it's less common with the female athletes I work with, but it is really common. I think a lot of people like that time point, and in some ways, our bodies, it is a nice time to eat more more volume of food because we're actually taking the time to sit down and relax and allow it to digest. But that doesn't mean the bulk of the calories need to come at that time or the bulk of the
Good
energy
point.
we're having.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time I'll recommend like, okay, if you don't have time to prepare vegetables during the day, and if you're getting full on vegetables at lunch, but you have a training session in the evening, like an after work training session, save the vegetables for dinner
Yeah.
when you have more time to rest and digest. But you have that fuel source, like you have more potatoes, more rice, more pasta, more bread in the afternoon.
Yeah. That makes sense. I know one switch I've made recently is putting my rice towards the middle of the day, especially because I'll work out mid morning or early afternoon. And then I'll put like more of like my potatoes and like if I want to do like a salad or some nice vegetables with like a good source of protein, like I'll leave that for later in the day. So it sounds like that's more or less what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I play volleyball. That's like one of
Oh,
my
fun.
sports that I do now.
Yeah.
But I'm on these rec leagues and the games have atrocious time, like start time
Yeah.
sometimes. Some of them are like 6:30 and that's okay, but some are 8:20, 9:15
Oh, good Lord.
games.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's brutal. And one strategy I've actually made is I'll have like some of the protein and the carb rich foods from my dinner before the game. And then after the game, I'll have the protein, like some more protein and all the vegetables after the
Mm,
game. So I don't have to like cram dinner into the end of the day, but I also don't want to eat a giant meal before I have to go play volleyball.
makes sense.
And it's worked really well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something I could utilize. I'm like, that's a good one. I love that strategy. I think the last thing that we could talk about that'd be very impactful here is gut health and how that relates to everything that we've been talking through thus far. Um, I know what you mentioned specifically was, again, how gut health can be impacting women's performance in athletics. So I'd be curious to know exactly like what it is that maybe you've had to work through with some of your clients as it relates to gut health, or what are some of the things that we need to know?
Hmm. Yeah. I work with a ton of athletes on gut distress during exercise, during competition. Um, and gut health does influence your body's ability to process nutrients and help your body not have things like side stitches or the runs before
Mm-hmm.
competition. Not yeah, it depends on what the competition is, but if you have pre-race nurse, for example, and you're pooping like before the competition, that is like
Everyone.
totally normal.
Yep,
Yes,
everyone.
there's nothing wrong with you. A bear is coming to attack you. You need to empty your bowels to do the
Yep.
competition. That's totally normal. But overall, I mean, in the field of nutrition, probably the last 10 years, there's so much more research in the gut brain axis and also how the quality and the health of your GI tract influences everything from mental health to your body's ability to prevent chronic disease, even generations to come. Like they have really interesting studies showing how, like, the gut microbiota of the mom influences the baby.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, ultimately, focusing on incorporating foods and nutrients that are productive for gut health will be another part of that foundation.
Yeah. Amazing. And I'm curious to know, let's see, what's the exact question that I have? Um, I guess this is kind of maybe an opposite question. Is there stuff that we do as athletes that could impact our overall gut health? And I guess what I mean by that is maybe our cortisol levels, or maybe like how much we're putting our body through a certain amount of strain, maybe the lack of recovery that we're doing. Is there anything that you've seen with the athletes that you've worked with and how that's maybe negatively impacted their gut health, and maybe how that now is like there's that push and pull back and forth of, well, now your gut health is in a place that's not great and that's now impacting your performance. I'm not sure if you've ever ran into anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, like most things in life, moderation is helpful. so,
Yep.
there's quite a bit of research showing that moderate levels of exercise are really productive to gut health. They encourage the growth of more productive, like good bacteria, and decrease the growth or overgrowth of bad bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as you said, like you mentioned cortisol, that's a really good hormone to talk about as far as like stressors, but too much exercise, or when we're doing a sport that requires a lot of high volume exercise over time, that can negatively impact our gut health. And so for athletes that are training, I would say subjectively probably over 10 hours a week. That's when focusing on those prebiotic rich foods, probiotic rich foods, meeting your body's energy needs. These things are really important to maintain that gut health while you're stressing it with all the stress hormones that are required to do this high volume of exercise.
Yeah. Okay. Because I was going to say, I feel like there's some of us that are walking around with unnecessary bloating or inflammation right now because of we're just not, we're either doing too much, or again, we're not doing enough of the recovery to support what we're doing. And again, recovery including sleep, actual recovery protocols, stress management, and the nutrition. So yeah, I was just curious if you had any like thoughts or insights on that. And so it sounds like
Mm-hmm.
there is something.
Yeah. Yeah. And the most common thing I see is athletes that are either intentionally or unintentionally under eating their body's energy needs for the day. They will have more bloating and more indigestion, more sides, like more pain. Um, and it's not always intuitive to eat more food to have gut issues feel better, right? So sometimes it's even this revolving process that gets us in these traps where like we're not eating because it causes gut issues, but then because we're not eating, it's leading to the overgrowth of bad bacteria and undergrowth of good bacteria. And so that's where working with a professional is really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of working with a professional, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure there's plenty of others that have too, but still maybe have their own questions. Maybe they want to do some sort of discovery call with you and see if there is an opportunity to work with you. Do you want to share a little bit more about like your services and how you can potentially help athletes from this call?
Yeah, I would love to. So my website is sportsnutritionforwomen.com. We don't
Simple.
just work with women either. Yeah, I know. I don't know how I got that URL. I didn't even have to pay for
simple.
it.
Love that. Yeah.
So sportsnutritionforwomen.com, we're a small private practice of nutritionists and dietitians, and we work with active people to Olympians. So anyone that's physically active we'll work with, but we do work with a really wide range. And we can work with people one-on-one. And also I have an e-course, so a sports nutrition for women e-course that goes into the specifics and is very in-depth with understanding how to meet your nutrient needs. And it's very, very practical. Like I was intentional when I created it to make it a resource that you could use for anyone that you support or yourself. And so you can contact me on that website. And just also to say, I want to be a resource for both the hybrid and the endurance community. So you don't have to have like a need or a capacity to work with us one-on-one to contact us with questions.
Yeah.
Like if you have any nutrition questions at all, feel free to reach out.
That we need more people like you in the world. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today. Again, I will be sure to link all of this stuff in the show notes for those of you that are looking to have Kristen as a resource. And who knows, maybe we'll get to have you for a second time here on the podcast if there's some more questions that come from this.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Kayla. It's been great.